Welcome once again to Smart Webinar using stimulus funding to improve student achievement. What you see on the screen is my photograph, so that's me. My name is Anju Visan Singh, and I'm Senior Manager Education Marketing for Smart Technologies. I would now next like to introduce the two speakers that we have on the webinar. Hillary Goldman, who's Director of Government Affairs, International Society for Technology in Education, or ISTE as many of us know it, in Washington, D.C., and Tom Greaves, who's co-author of America's Digital Schools Report, Chairman, the Greaves Group in California. Before I ask Hillary to speak, I just wanted to share the results from, the questions that you had answered that we had sent out to you earlier. And according to your responses, essentially 49% of you thought that all of the factors that we had listed out measure the success of technology in education in your school or district or state. But, when you look at individual factors, through improved standardized test scores was selected by 16% of people. So clearly, as a single most important factor, that stands out. So with that, what I would like to do is, having shared that information, hand you over to Hillary Goldman. Once again, she's Director of Government Affairs at ISTE. Hillary?
Thank you, Anju. Good afternoon. I'm Hillary Goldman. I'm the Director for Government Affairs at the International Society for Technology and Education, also known as ISTE. For those of you who may not be familiar with ISTE, ISTE is a membership organization well known for our leadership in developing the National Education Technology Standards, also known as NET, as well as hosting the National Educational Computing Conference, also known as NAC. Our members share a passion for leveraging technology to transform teaching and learning. I'm thrilled to be here with you this afternoon and want to thank Smart Technologies and their entire team for inviting me to participate. And I also want to take a moment to recognize and thank Smart Technologies for their leadership in the education arena and their commitment to ensuring our nation's students have the skills and know-how to succeed in whatever future they choose to take, whether continued higher education, continued lifelong learning, and careers. They're a great partner with ISTE, and we really enjoy all of our partnering with SMART. What I'd like to do today on this session is to give you an overview of the ARRA, which is the latest acronym and the latest lingo here inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C. ARRA stands for the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. I'll give you a bit of an overview, and then what I'd also like to do is talk about strategies on how to harness some of that funding for technology, as well as opportunities to get more involved in becoming more effective advocates in education technology. So let me get started. Here's a nice quote from President Barack Obama, which we've seen similar quotes from him, focusing on the importance of education and ensuring that we are not outcompeted tomorrow. This perspective is what really led us into the ARRA, which provided the largest and most historic funding increase for education ever at the federal level. You can see from this slide the entire package was a $787 billion package for ARRA, with $575 billion in spending, and some of it in tax. This slide is a nice slide that was developed by the National Education Association that gives you a feel for where the money was put. And you'll see that's a huge slice that went to education compared to all of the other components within ARRA. So you really can get a feel for where this administration and this Congress were going when they decided what were they going to do for the nation to fund our recovery and reinvestment, and they really had a commitment to education. The guiding principles under ARRA, a lot of this you may have seen before, spending the money quickly, saving jobs, But what you may not be thinking about is the underlying tensions that are included under ARRA, which is in something that us as educators and as this money is distributed at the local level, the pieces that may have to play out. There's a tension between spending the money effectively and spending the money quickly. Can you do both? There's a tension between saving jobs, and there's a tension between school innovation. If all of your funding is going to save jobs, how are you going to be providing the innovation that's also being demanded of you? And then the third piece is this funding cliff. What happens 1 year, 2 years from now when this money dries up? How do we continue in the innovation? How do we continue with saving jobs? So those are pieces that, for those of you who are listening at the local level, that you really need to grapple with. We're going to be expected 2 years from now to account for what has been done with this money. And if we can't show that we've made strides in student achievement and innovation and school reform, that's going to be a problem for the education community. We really need to be showing successes a couple of years from now. And again, how do we balance that? How do we save jobs and make sure we have enough teachers to teach our students, and at the same time try to guarantee those other pieces that the Congress and the administration is requiring of us? Within ARRA, under the Department of Education, there's really kind of two big tranches of funds. There's the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund, and then there's the Categorical Education Programs. The categorical education programs, the funding for that is for those programs that already exist. They're programs that you're familiar with. The State Fiscal Stabilization Fund is basically a big pot of money that's going to the states, and this big pot there was never a program at the federal level for this. So this is a brand new. As this chart loads, this is a chart that is developed by the Department of Education, and it is on their website. At the end of our presentation, we have a list of a lot of good resources for you. But this really outlines where the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund is going. You'll see that most of it goes out by formula to the governors, and a smaller part will be going out on competitive level. The formula side, we'll talk about it a little bit more in the next couple slides. The money will go to the governors, and then the governors will be distributing that money based on state funding formulas. On the competitive side, there's $5 billion that's divided up into two competitive programs. One is a Race to the Top program, and that also will be going to the states. And then there's a smaller program called the What Works in Innovation, which is $650 million. And that will provide opportunities for folks at the local level to compete for that $650 million. And that will be a competitive grant through the Department of Education. For those of you who've been following ARRA pretty closely, you've seen these four assurances listed over and over and over again. In the state application to get the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund money, the governors need to agree that they will work to achieve these four components. And this is the piece that's really going to be driving the next set of funding as well when that comes out. But also driving what the Department of Education will be looking back at us as the education community to see, have we achieved, what have we done with this $100 billion that we've been given. So far, 13 states have received funding, the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund. You can see them listed here. All of their applications are up on the website of the Department of Education. But what you'll also notice when you look at the applications, there really is no detail. I mean, basically, the governors have to mark that they will work to achieve these four assurances, and they just have to list how much funding they're going to be using to help make their state or the education funding whole in these various states. So again, at this point, this big pot of money is really playing out at the state and local level. Most of the game, in a sense, of developing the ARRA and the funding at the federal level, a lot of that, some of that is over. And again, this is the piece that's now playing out at the state level. And so if you're from a state that isn't listed here, you may be interested in finding out how come the state hasn't submitted its application. At this point, the state submits an application, and within 2 weeks, the department will award the funding for that state. Here's a chart referring to the race to the top in the innovation grants. Tom's going to talk a little bit more in detail about these later on, and how do you structure a grant proposal for these funds. But here again, they're listed out here for you so that you can also refer back to this in the future. We do not know yet what these grants are for sure going to look like. The grant announcements will most likely be coming in the fall. That's what we're hearing. And again, that first race to the top is, again, it's a state application to the Department of Ed, whereas the Investing in What Works is a local application. So that's really the only opportunity for locals in that larger state fiscal stabilization money to get their hands on any of that money, unless you work internally within your state. On the categorical program side, and again, these are programs that you're familiar with: Title I, IDEA, Enhancing Education Through Technology, Statewide Data Systems. There's a few other programs under the Department of Ed that received funding as well, such as Teacher Quality Grants, which is a higher education program for pre-service. The first half of the Title I and the IDEA monies have been dispersed. The Enhancing Education Through Technology money will be dispersed July 1st. It will be coming out from the department at the same time as the FY09 funding is dispersed. And I just learned that the department is permitting states to use this money in an all-competitive manner. I'm not sure how familiar all of you are with the way this the Enhancing Education Through Technology program runs. I'll also refer to it as EETT. For the most part, it's half competitive and half formula, but it's our understanding that the department is permitting states to run the ARRA money, and it's completely competitive. And some states might be choosing that option. We don't know yet. It's still in the initial stages, so we don't know if any states will be doing that. Regardless, this will be two, even though the money is going out at the same time, there will be two, each state will have side-by-side competitions or side-by-side disbursements of formula, because there will be different accountability and reporting requirements for the ARRA money than for the regular FY09 money. So there may be a little bit of confusion in that, but there will be two sets of disbursements possibly happening at the same time within your state. The statewide data systems funding, that, it's our understanding, will be announced in the fall as well, and that will be a grant program as well, a competitive program as well to the states. And at this point, I don't have much details on that program. So using ARRA funds to drive school reform and improvement, I actually took these 2 bullet points from a document from the U.S. Department of Education. And you can see that the department recognizes leveraging technology and modern digital tools as a viable option, and sort of an incremental and instrumental in achieving a lot of the goals that the department has set out. And this, as again, I took directly from one of their documents about using technology to improve teaching and learning. And they specifically do talk about training teachers to use software and technology-enabled whiteboards and other interactive technologies. And they also talk about modernizing school facilities, making sure that schools have up-to-date science labs and technology. As you read through that document, and also as you read through all of the notices from the department, and even those 4 assurances, we would read all of those things and say, how can we reach the goals set out by any of the pieces that the department is laying forth without effective integration of technology and making sure our teachers and our administrators are adequately prepared to implement them and to use them. So this is so that what you should be encouraged to think about the entire funds for ARRA as an opportunity to purchase technology and purchase professional development for technology for your teachers and for your administrators as well. So some strategies to think about. Reaching across states and schools and districts, thinking systemically, always keeping in the back of your mind about the funding cliff. The money isn't guaranteed to continue. What can we implement that can be long-standing and sustainable? What are these other programs out there that need to achieve certain goals, and what is it that technology can do to help achieve those other goals? What's really important now as you start working at the local level is starting to figure out your plan and your strategy. And I've got a few slides here that I've taken from one of our ISTE members who's in Alabama. He joined me on a presentation a couple weeks ago. And he really talks through that at the local level, how is he looking at the ARRA money now that it's there, and how is he strategically working to try to get a piece of that? And not just thinking in terms of getting a piece of it, but really showing and showcasing how technology can achieve the goals of all of his other colleagues that he works with, and where is it that he can work with them. So he really starts talking about having your strategic plan. Where does technology fit into it? Finding your research for technology and how it's improving student achievement. And then also doing the hard work, the legwork. How much money are the categorical programs getting in your district? And on the Department of Education's website, there is a listing, district by district, of how much money from ARRA is going to Title I for every district in every state, as well as for IDEA. So you can get a feel for how much of that additional money is going into those programs, and how can you work with the folks that manage and administer those programs to help them achieve their goals. I was talking to another colleague of mine at the local level who mentioned that the Title I people have outreach to her because they want to harness technology to achieve their goals, and the way they're teaming up is that the Title I funding will be used to purchase the technology, while the EETT money, the EdTech money, will be used to provide the professional development. So they're coming together and working together and holding those conversations. So that's a piece that I really encourage you to do as well. Getting to the table, making sure you have the kinds of conversations with all of the stakeholders locally. And collaborating and being part of a team, which is a lot of what I was talking about, and showing how what you do and the things that you're passionate about can transform instruction and help your colleagues do their job better and help our students succeed. And as he said, never give up, and that remember, whatever you're able to work with your colleagues, it's more than what you had before, and that you're making a difference for students. ISTE is working on a survey, or we've developed a survey because we want to start tracking how districts and schools are using the ARR money for technology implementation and technology professional development. So I encourage you to go to that website and share with us. This information we'll also share back to the community, as well as I'll be using that to help me as we share information with the Department of Education and with the Congress to let them know all the great things that are happening out in the field. And then finally, a couple of slides on making your voices heard. And it's really important that as a community, our voice is heard, that members of Congress, that the administration, and even legislators at the local level know that education technology is something that's important to their constituents. So I encourage all of you to go onto the EdTech Action Network. If there's that yellow box right there, you put in your zip code, and a letter appears that you can then edit and send to your members of Congress and let them know how important education technology is for our nation's future and for our students' future success. And finally, any of you who are coming to NAC, which will be in Washington, D.C., my hometown, we're providing NAC attendees with an opportunity to visit the Hill. There's a small fee in addition to coming to your NAC registration fee to do this, but we will provide you transportation, we'll schedule your meetings, we will prepare you for your meetings. We will have a T-shirt so we're all it's a colorful sea of blue going up to the Hill, and we have a VIP congressional reception in the evening. So, again, if any of you on the phone are coming to NAC, I encourage you to get a start in some advocacy efforts and to join us on the Hill. And I'm just going to close by thanking Smart Technologies for their support. Smart is one of the sponsors for this event, and if it weren't for them, we wouldn't be able to have such a strong voice on the Hill as well as in the state capitol. So, again, we really appreciate your leadership and your support. So with that, I'm going to leave it over to Tom, and I hope I left him enough time to say a few words as well.
Thank you very much, Hillary. Before we go to Tom, we do have a poll question for all of our participants. And the question is, do you already have a plan for spending your stimulus dollars? Yes or no? Please just make a selection and submit the answer. I'll wait for a minute or two, and then I will ask for the poll results. Josh, are we ready with the poll results? Okay, so only 12.5% of you have said that you already have a plan for spending your stimulus dollars, and 87.5% have said no. So hopefully the information that is being given by the speakers in the session will help. And later in the session, when we have time for questions and answers, there may be questions that will further, provide the answers that are required in order for the plans to be prepared. So thank you very much. And I would now like to ask Tom Grieve, who is our next speaker, to his presentation. Tom is co-author of America's Digital Schools Report. He's also the chairman of the Greaves Group in California. Tom, over to you.
Thank you very much, Anju. And I'd like to thank Anju, Michelle, and the rest of the SMART team for making this event happen. It's obvious that they care about you, not only from this, but from the many other things that they do for the education community. I also wanted to thank Hillary for those excellent remarks. And even though I've learned a lot about ARA over the last several months, I still learned a few new things today. And I think that part of what's going on is that this is still a very fluid program. Rules are changing, and it will be important to stay informed or you'll miss out. My remarks today are informed by the America's Digital Schools studies that we've done in 2006 and more recently in 2008, where we surveyed the top 2,500 school districts in America by size. That's all the schools over 5,000 students. And we collected a lot of information about where they are today, but more importantly, where they're going over the next 5 years. And so that turned out to be quite valuable in a number of areas, including the one that we have today. I'd like to move to the additional opportunities that are out there. Hillary had mentioned several of them that are out there, and everyone on this webinar has already read a lot about many of these different areas. But I'm focusing on just 3 or 4 that are a little bit off the beaten path, but even better, they are more competitive. And so if there's formula money, you're going to get it, okay, or you're not going to get it, but it doesn't really matter too much what you do. It's just going to happen. And we all know that there's a lot of talk about whether or not some formula money will be backfilled or used to make up lost tax revenue and so forth. But several of the programs that I'm talking about today are really competitive in nature, and they add up to many billions of dollars. And so this is an area where it's really up to you if you get the money. The first one that I'd like to talk about is one that is brand new. There hasn't been much said about it. It's the Broadband Technology Opportunities Fund. And it has about $4 billion in that fund managed by the NTIA, plus another $3 billion from the Department of Agriculture, altogether adding up to the $7.2 billion. And its purpose is to provide broadband connectivity to underserved and unserved areas. And as we know from our America's Digital Schools studies, that broadband connectivity is extremely important, and we labeled it a crisis because there isn't enough capacity out there today, and going forward, the plans for additional capacity aren't as robust as the needs for capacity. So if you think about everything that's coming down the line, it's almost always driving needs for larger bandwidth, whether it's cloud computing or online learning. Bandwidth needs are going to go up. Another important point is that with the advent of netbooks and other things, it's getting easier and easier to extend the school beyond the classroom, send the kids home with a device, and you'd like that device to be connected wherever they are. Well, the BTOP program will fix that for you. If you read through the several hundred pages of legislation, a couple of things jump out. One is that education is extremely important evaluation criteria in the upcoming BTOP grant. Remember, they haven't written the rules yet, but in the federal legislation that's guiding the rule makers, they mention it a lot. Secondly, the grants are going to be graded on how well they serve the largest number of people. So if you just look around in your schools, they and their families are the largest number of people in any community. So if you team up with somebody in a school, your school teams up as a member of a consortium, say, to go after some of these BTOP money, you will be ahead of the game compared to somebody that's going after it and they don't bring in the local schools. And so with this money, you'll have an opportunity to connect all the homes and all the students, if it would work out that way. And I think there's also another point here to be made, and that's that if more money flows into your system, it may also free up money for other purposes. We found in America's Digital Schools that at least half of the software that's purchased by schools comes from non-technology funds. And so if more money goes in one way, your school financial officers can help make sure that there's other money for other things that may not be BTOP related if you're to win BTOP. The second one is QZAB. Now, QZAB has been around for quite a while, 15 years that I've been aware of it and using it, and it's Qualified Zone Academy Bonds. Qualified Zone Academy Bonds. And what these are no-interest loans with a long payback period. And the net result of that financially, if your school district is going to implement a program using bonds, is that you have essentially a 50% reduction in the cost of the project because you're paying no interest. And so it's a very good program. There's an extra $1 billion being added to it this year, and to me that means that a lot of people haven't focused on it, and there probably aren't a lot of applications in the queue for that extra $1 billion. And as you meant, if you listen to what Hillary is saying, this is that extra money is larger than some of the other programs that are out there in their totality. And the good thing is the funding can be used for a wide range of things. If you wanted to put a smart board in every classroom, this would be the way to do it. If you wanted to do more professional development, it will do it. And so it's very flexible in how you use this. The name qualified zone came from the original legislation that said that the schools or whoever got this, whether it was schools or not schools. And by the way, that's an important point. For this money, you're competing with people other than fellow school people. You're competing with people that want to build roads with it or whatever. So you'll have to have a good competitive story. But if you live in an economic empowerment zone or an enterprise community, then you can apply for this. And then recently, they've added the criteria that if 35% or more of your students are on free or reduced lunch, that you also qualify. So with those several ways of qualifying, there will be a lot of people on the phone today that can qualify. Obviously, not everybody. The next program is Race to the Top, and Hillary did mention that. There are two parts to this program. The $4.35 billion is really state. And although I would encourage you to work with your state, because many school districts have larger staffs than their state technology counterparts. And so get your superintendent involved and make sure that your state has the most competitive opportunities possible. The second one is wide open, and it's $650 million. It can be submitted by a school district or it can be submitted by a consortium. So you can go find other players to work with you, whether they be vendors, other institutions, universities, and so forth, and apply for the $650 million. And these, innovation is going to be very important. This race to the top is really designed to showcase innovation. I've heard Arnie Duncan and Mike Smith both speak about this, and they feel that if we spend $100+ billion more on education and nothing new comes from it, that it will be a sad day. So some points that are important to know is that if you're using in the race to the top, you must, as part of that, show that you're using your Title I dollars to advance reforms. So if it's just business as usual, that will not be well received. Data is always important. Data has been important for a long time, and you notice that there's another $250 million in longitudinal data grants that's going out, but also data that you get at the local level. And so any time you can in your proposal, point out that you're being data-driven and you're training the teachers and administrators to increase their capacity to do data-driven decision-making. It would be good. And then finally, it's going to be important to find partners to go after these. And I would encourage you to make your alliances soon because there's only so many partners out there, and those that are going to get the grants will likely have gotten their partners early, even before some of the grant legislation or rulemaking comes out. School construction is another one of those areas that has a lot of money, $22 billion. And this money can go for, again, a wide range of activities. When you're building a school and you want to include computers or other technology as part of the school, you can do it. You can also, as part of your bonds, include money for the maintenance of it. So just as they build a new school and they throw in several years of maintenance for the elevators in the school or a warranty on the roof, you can do the same thing with technology, and it will be a way of moving some funds that you might spend out of your operating budget into the capital budget. There is a new law that was just passed the House. I don't think it's passed the Senate yet, and so, but it's $6.4 billion for green schools, which is over and above the $22 billion. So that's obviously another area where technology has a lot to say. And then finally, there's the Build America bonds. These are not just education, but they're another source of tax-free money. So I hope you can see that there's a lot of money out there. How do you go about winning it? Well, it's pretty clear that if you're going to win, you're going to have a compelling story. If it's something that people have said, these all go to grant readers. The grant readers are very experienced. That's why they were picked, and they say, well, that was done in 1975, then you're not likely to get your grant. It's important also to have good research. It was very important to have multiple sources of research. Vendor-driven research is generally not as effective as research produced by a nonprofit organization or a university. I think it's also important, and it's been said several times, that having student achievement as part of your grant, a promise of it, is important. If all you're going to do is say that the children are happy and their parents are happy, there are other less expensive ways to do it than I say, a technology grant. And so up front, if you call out that you are going to improve student achievement and you know why, you're more likely to be successful. And then finally, having convincing arguments is important, and that comes from things like that you have a lot of experience, you're building on a pilot program that's successful, you have an outside advisory board, or other ways that you might consider in your grant application. One of the things that I like to do is have a scorecard, get a scoring rubric, read the grant application, and reverse engineer it and figure out what would it take to win. So somewhere there are people reading the grants, and they've got their own scorecard, and they're deciding. And so you make your own scorecard and then find somebody, maybe a previous grant reader, somebody that's experienced, and ask them to grade your proposal and tell you how you're doing. It's very hard for anybody, and I speak from experience with myself, to understand and to know our own weaknesses. We all have blind spots, and so getting out there and getting somebody to critique you honestly is a very valuable exercise. That's assuming you have high confidence. As Hillary mentioned, there are the 4 key pillars in the Department of Ed has put out, and I want to focus on just the bottom 2 for a minute and notice that a lot of those do talk about improving effectiveness, improving results, getting better results, and particularly in low-performing schools. And we know that technology can be a very valuable ally in filling these 2 bullets. However, it's not always thought that way in the press, partly because we don't always do a good job of implementing the technology. But I was struck earlier this week. I was visiting relatives, and one of my 9-year-old nephews comes up and says that he's using a smartboard in his classroom. And he went to great lengths to explain to me why that was a good thing. And the bottom line was that the smartboard helped them to learn better. And I thought, coming from a 9-year-old, that's something you can take to the bank. Looking at the low-performing schools is important. There's going to be a lot of emphasis on the low-performing schools, and there's going to be tremendous emphasis to either fix them or close them or reconstitute them. And so if you're in a district that has low-performing schools, I would encourage you to really focus in on them and say, how can technology, coupled with all the other things we know that are required to have a successful school, work together to get that school off the low-performing list. If you look from America's Digital Schools at what makes an effective project, the number one item as reported by the 2,500 school districts is leadership. This is leadership at the superintendent and district office level, leadership in the building, the principal level, and also the department head leaders, like the head of the math department and so forth. If they don't buy into the project, it really doesn't matter what else you do, you're unlikely to be successful. Or if you're successful, that success will not be sustained. I should have mentioned the school boards in there as well. Secondly is involving all the stakeholders. Frequently when I ask that, they say, oh, yes, we're involving all the stakeholders. I say, well, let's list them. And almost never do they list all the stakeholders that are out there. Surprisingly enough, occasionally they forget about students as stakeholders, or parents, or the press, or others. So make sure that the stakeholders are involved. Have clear objectives. It's amazing that the number of times I go to a school or school district and I ask them, what constitutes success for this project in 5 years? And they really don't know. Or I get 4 answers from 4 different people. So having clear objectives that everybody buys into is important. Interlocking dependencies is sort of a code word there for the fact that every project, every person in the project has some dependencies to be successful. So if you're a teacher, one of your dependencies is that you need to be trained. Somebody on the other side of that handshake has to figure out how they're going to get you trained, and that might require time off for training, and that might be a financial obligation. So the building principal might have to go to the district financial officer and say, do you have money for release time so I can do the training, and so forth. I've mentioned tied academic standards. I like causal ties versus correlation ties, and I've mentioned independent evaluations before. So perhaps the biggest one is the 5 Ps, prior planning prevents poor performance. If in your grant request or in real life, if you don't have a very detailed, comprehensive planning tools that you use, you will not be successful. You look at this webinar today, it was well planned out, not by accident, because it was been done many times, and there was extensive planning to make sure that it would be going okay. Some key takeaways. Although the funding picture is cloudy, you will find that there are many sources of funding. We've mentioned the ARA funding, but there are others out there, and I'd encourage you to be creative. Second is look at real reform. That's going to be important. I remember a webinar not too long ago that Secretary Duncan said that if schools promised and didn't deliver, then he wasn't going to reward them in the Phase 2 grants to the same extent as he would reward those that did promise and deliver. Technology, as we know, can play a major role in reform. However, it has to be implemented properly. And finally, going forward, it's going to be extremely important to be adept at winning competitive grants. That's the way the world is going. To help you a little bit, knowing that this is a complex subject that's changing all the time, we've listed several pages here of reference information. We can click on these links and go and get other information. They come from multiple sources, not just the Department of Ed, but in total, they will show you a pretty good picture about what's going on. I think it was mentioned, but if not, I'll mention that these presentations will be available for downloading later on, and so you'll have this. You don't need to write them down. And I'm just going to click through a couple of them here just so that you can see what they are. ASBO is the Association for School Business Officials, and your school business official has a hotline to people in Washington that's studying this topic very closely. And with that, I would like to turn it back to Anju.
Thank you very much, Tom. So it's time now for some questions, and we've had a few questions come in. We probably have about 10 minutes, so we'll try to cover off as much as we can. And in case we can't cover off any of the questions submitted by the audience, we will just connect with them on a one-to-one basis because we have their contact details with us. So the first question that we have here is, if Hillary, you could take it, please. The question is, can you provide us any tips on how to best demonstrate success measures at the school and district levels? Accountability will be increasingly important as we will need to report on the impact of how we decide to spend our stimulus funding.
Right. I think with the Title I and the IDEA monies that's coming down, at this point, there aren't any additional accountability requirements, but the second tranche of money may have some different reporting requirements, as well as the Ed Tech funding that's coming out in July. That ARRA money will have a different reporting requirement rather than, or will look a little bit different than what you're used to reporting. And then the state fiscal stabilization fund money, that, Tom may have some tips on that. That money is really coming down through your state. Again, this first part of the money is coming through just the regular, your state funding program. The second piece of the money is where I think the department will add some other kinds of accountability and reporting requirements. So in some sense, some of the things that we're going to have to report on, we don't know exactly what it's all going to look like, But if you tie everything back to those 4 assurances that both Tom and I addressed, that's something you really need to be focusing on because that's what we're going to have to prove that we've been successful.
Okay, thanks very much, Tom. Do you want to add something to that information?
Oh, that was excellent. I probably couldn't add anything to that.
Great.
Okay. So I'll move on to the next question, and that is for you, Tom. The question is, professional development is a key area of focus for us this year. Are there stimulus funding opportunities for professional development to help train our teachers on how to effectively use technology in the classroom?
And the answer to that is that most of the programs that were mentioned do allow for professional development to be funded through those programs. There's a few that don't. For instance, the BTOP program would not allow for professional development, but I would say that not only do most of them allow it, most of them would expect that you would have sufficient funds for professional development to make sure that the program was run properly. Hillary,
Right.
do you have any other thoughts on that?
I agree, and just remember the EETT funding, a minimum of 25% needs to go for professional development.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that. So another question that has come in is, do private and parochial schools have any access to the funding?
I can take a first stab at that. Any way that you currently get funding or can get funding within Title I, IDEA, or EETT, it would be the same. I'm somewhat familiar with EETT. It's my understanding that there are times that, let's say, a public school is doing some kind of a professional development opportunity. They've got an open slot because they don't have enough teachers filling those slots or somebody cancels. Sometimes they'll call down to a parochial school, and a parochial school teacher can come in for that professional development training. So I think there's some pieces within EETT that some of the funding gets through. I'm not really familiar with Title I or IDEA to know if there's ways that works with those programs.
This is Tom. I think it's pretty clear that the private schools will not receive stimulus funding directly, but the federal law does require that school districts provide equitable services to eligible private schools' children, their teachers, and their families under Title I, as Hillary mentioned, and IDEA. And so if you go to the Department of Ed website and look under Title I guidance, and on one of the pages in our bibliography, go to page 34, and it talks about this particular topic. Now, this equitable services doesn't apply to the state fiscal stabilization fund, so they don't necessarily are not going to give you extra money in a private school to fund the teacher's salaries, say. But there are other areas under Title I and IDEA where it's clear that private schools can receive funding.
That's great. Thank you for that. The next question is for you, Tom, and it is, do you qualify for QZAB district-wide, or do you qualify by building?
QZAB is really by project. And so the QZAB the projects I've worked on have been submitted by the district, but they benefited only a few of the buildings, 2 or 3 buildings in a district. And I didn't mention when I was talking about QZAB that how QZAB funds are released varies by state. And so your governor has appointed a state QZAB coordinator. And if you're going to win your QZAB funds for your building or your district, you better make that QZAB coordinator your best friend, and you better make sure that the community gets to make him their best friend so that you can compete against other people that don't have as worthy of projects as you do.
Okay. And I think we have time for one last question, and that is that district and building level administrators have very little information available at their fingertips in order to help them plan. The guidelines are tight. The timelines are tight. Where can they go to talk to each other? I remember seeing a link in Hillary's presentation, but if there's more information to answer this question would be great. So it's for both Hillary and Tom.
Hillary, do you want to go first on that one?
Sure. Where can they go for guidance?
How can they talk to each other? There are some districts that have figured it out and have already applied for funding, probably getting it. But there are those that are still figuring it out. If they want to contact those that have some answers to their questions, is there a forum they can go to talk to each other? Do you know?
Right, that's actually a great question, because that's something that I'm grappling with now, too, because I know, there are some folks that are working on this, and I want them to be able to share what they're working on with other folks who are trying to figure out how do you go about doing it. So for those of you who are RSC members, we are going to be holding a webinar. We're probably going to be doing some other kind of Web 2.0 information sharing opportunities. So keep a lookout for something from ISTE, and we will share it with SMART as well so that they can distribute it to you. Specifically what to do now, I think it's just reaching out to as many people as you can and just talking and figuring out who's in leadership, who's making decisions, what are the plans that are out there, working through this school building-wide, district-wide, and just finding out within your area who are those key individuals, because I have a feeling what I'm finding is that it's happening organically and it's happening differently at each local level. So I don't think there's a magic wand to say, this is the person to speak to. One person you do want to start talking to is the person district-wide who handles your federal projects, your federal funding and your federal programs. I mean, that might be a good first place to start and see what their advice is.
This is Tom. A couple of additional points I would make is that there are a lot of avenues to finding out information. And if I were in a district or school technology director's chair, I would want to make sure that I'm talking to my state counterparts first. And I know that they are on frequent webinars at the national level where they get them all together, they tell them all the latest news. It's going to come to them before it comes to you. They're going to then make the rules about how it's distributed. So you could talk to somebody at the Department of Ed, but they'll tell you they're giving the money to a particular state. So it's best to get a hold of the people in the state that are deciding how that money will be spent. As Hillary said on EETT grants, will it be competitive or by formula? Secondly, I've noticed that there are many other organizations in the school districts, functional areas, that also have good pipelines. So I mentioned the district financial officers. They have a hotline to their national ASBO office, and they're again tied into the Department of Ed, similar as Hillary is. The same thing applies for the Title I coordinators, for the superintendents, for school board members. The NEA is particularly active in this area as well. So I think I would go to your natural constituencies and ask them what's going on and get their advice and help, because I think everyone that I mentioned is definitely involved at the Washington level and can pass down the information to you.
That's great. I would now like to thank both Hillary and Tom for sharing excellent information with us. This is a time when there's lots of opportunity and, but there's also need for a lot of information. So thank you for providing some of that information to our participants. What I would like to do also is to say that SMART is going to launch a new website tomorrow, and the URL will be www.smarttech.com/stimulus funds. The website is going to go live tomorrow, and what you can get from the website is, technology solutions that can help you achieve some of the objectives outlined by Arra. So check that website out, and I would also like to outline the other upcoming webinars. So on Tuesday, May 26th, we have a webinar coming up entitled Budgeting for Necessary Technology. And on the 2nd of June, we have another one that is titled Closing the Skills Gap, Preparing Teachers for Technology-Enabled Classrooms. If you haven't already signed up, please do, and we look forward to having you on one of our events once again. I will thank all of our participants as well. There is an exit poll that will be coming up on the screen very shortly. Please do answer the poll, but in the meantime, on behalf of Smart Technologies, I would like to thank the participants as well as the speakers. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.